He slammed his tray down so hard the entire mess hall went quiet. Staff Sergeant Dale Briggs pointed straight at her, this woman who had just walked through the door carrying a sniper rifle like it was part of her, and laughed, not a chuckle, a full, ugly, mocking laugh that bounced off every wall. "Snow Princess has arrived, boys. God help us all." Every eye in the room turned to her, and she didn't flinch, not even once. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea what was coming for them, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay with me until the very end. You will not regret it. The helicopter banked hard left before it dropped the way they always did when approaching FOB Kestrel, low, fast, and without warning, because warning was a luxury nobody could afford out here. The wind came off the Hindu Kush like a blade, the kind of cold that didn't just touch your skin, but pushed through it, reached into your chest, and grabbed something vital. It was the kind of cold that reminded men they were fragile, that they could break. Sergeant Ava Mitchell stepped off that helicopter and into that cold like she had been born in it. She was 29 years old, 5 feet 6 inches, 140 pounds of muscle and scar tissue, and something else, something quieter and harder to name. She had done 2 deployments before this one in Iraq, one in the southern provinces of Afghanistan. She had 17 confirmed kills. She had never missed a required shot. She had never filed a complaint. She had never asked for anything except to be placed where the mission required her. None of that mattered the moment she walked through the gates of FOB Kestrel. What mattered apparently was that she was a woman. She hadn't even cleared the landing zone when she heard it not shouted, not whispered, but delivered at exactly the right volume for maximum humiliation. The kind of volume that a man uses when he wants everyone to hear, but also wants to pretend it was casual. "Somebody told me we were getting a new sniper." Nobody said anything about a figure skater. She didn't turn around. She kept walking. Her boots pressed even prints into the snow, each step deliberate, each step measured. She had learned a long time ago that reacting was a form of surrender. And Ava Mitchell did not surrender. But she noted the voice. She filed it away. She would place it to a face within the hour. It took 40 minutes. His name was Staff Sergeant Dale Briggs. She found that out from the duty roster that was pinned to the wall of the operations center, where Captain Ryan Foster met her with a firm handshake and the careful, measured expression of a man trying to be fair, while also being genuinely uncertain. He was 41, lean, gray at the temples. The kind of officer who had seen enough combat to stop romanticizing it, but not enough failure to stop believing in structure. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said not unkindly, "welcome to Kestrel. It's not comfortable, but it's ours." "Sir," she said. That was it, just the one word. He looked at her for a moment longer than he needed to. She was used to that. People always looked a second too long, trying to find something, fear maybe, or uncertainty that they could use to orient themselves. Something familiar. When they didn't find it, they didn't know what to do with their hands. "Your file is impressive," Foster said finally. He didn't sound like he was flattering her. He sounded like a man reading data. "Coast Kandahar. Your instructors at Quantico called you." He paused, the ghost of something crossing his face, focused. "That sounds about right," she said. He studied her again. Then he turned to the map on the wall, satellite overlay of the valley system that surrounded the base elevation lines, dense and tangled like the rings of a very old, very complicated tree. "We have a medical convoy operation scheduled in 8 days," he said. "Route through the Caragol Valley. We'll need overwatch capability." "Understood," she said. "Get yourself settled. I'll introduce you to the squad at 0600 tomorrow." She nodded, picked up her gear, and walked out. Briggs was waiting in the corridor. Not accidentally. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and a look on his face that she recognized immediately, not anger, not suspicion, but something more calculated than either. It was the expression of a man who had already decided what she was and was now simply waiting for her to confirm it. "Snow Princess," he said. It wasn't a question. She stopped. She looked at him, really looked the way she looked at a target, steady and without emotion, mapping distance and angle and wind. Only in this case mapping the contours of his arrogance, the exact shape of his certainty. He was big, 6'2", maybe 6'3", thick through the shoulders. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and had decided to let that go in favor of something harder. A scar bisected his left eyebrow. His jaw was set like concrete. "Briggs," she said. He blinked. Just once. He hadn't expected her to know his name. "How do you duty roster?" she said. "Third name from the top. Yours the senior squad leader." She paused. "I'm Sergeant Mitchell. I'll be working Overwatch on the Caragol mission." Another pause, exactly long enough to let the next words land clean. "I'm looking forward to it." She walked away. She didn't look back. Behind her, she heard him say, still at that exact calculated volume, "God help us if that's our Overwatch." She kept walking. She kept walking, and she filed that away too. The mess hall at FOB Kestrel was a converted storage unit that smelled of diesel and canned soup and the particular brand of exhaustion that settles into a place when people have been fighting in it for too long. The tables were long and metal, the kind that rang like a bell when someone set a tray down too hard. The lighting was the sickly yellow of old fluorescence that nobody had gotten around to replacing. Ava arrived for the first dinner service at 18:30. She took her tray. She took her food. She sat at the end of a table near the far wall with her back to the corner and a clear line of sight to the door. She always sat like that. It took approximately 4 minutes for the performance to begin. Briggs came in with his usual entourage. 3 men who moved with him the way a shadow moves with a light source, always just slightly behind, always angled to catch his reflection. He surveyed the room, saw her, and his face did that thing. It did that slow, ugly unfurling of contempt. He didn't sit down first. He walked to his table and set his tray down with a crack that split through the ambient noise of the hall and killed it, immediately, like turning off a switch. "Gentlemen," he said loudly to no one in particular and everyone in general, "I want to do a quick threat assessment for tomorrow's patrol." He looked at Ava. 1 enemy snipers in the hills. 2 IEDs on the main road. 3, he let the pause stretch out slow and deliberate, savoring it the way some men savor cruelty, our own Overwatch. He picked up his fork. God willing, only the first 2 are serious. The table around him laughed. Some of it was genuine. Some of it was the hollow performative laughter of men who laughed because the man with the most power in the room had just made a sound that required answering. Ava picked up her fork and continued eating. She did not look at him. She did not look at the men who laughed. She looked at her food with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, unhurried, precise, absorbing. But she was not ignoring it. Ignoring implies choosing not to hear. Ava heard everything. She cataloged everything. The timing of his jokes, the rhythm of the laughter, who laughed first, who laughed last, who didn't laugh at all. That was where she found him. Corporal Ethan Brooks. He was young, maybe 22, 23, the kind of young that made him look perpetually surprised by the world. He had an open face, the kind that was bad for poker and good for everything else. He was sitting 3 seats down from Briggs, and he was not laughing. He was watching Ava with an expression she hadn't seen since she'd walked through the gate, not hostility, not mockery, but something more careful than either. Curiosity, real curiosity. The kind that comes before judgment rather than after it. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she looked back at her food. He looked away. But she had noted him, filed him away with everything else. After dinner, she went back to her bunk, a corner space in the female sleeping quarters, which was a room that had been designed as a supply closet and retrofitted with a narrow bed, a locker, and a window the size of a sheet of paper. She laid out her equipment with the systematic care of someone who had done it so many times it had become meditative. Rifle, scope, cleaning kit, field kit, maps. She spread the maps on the bunk, the valley system, the route of the convoy, the elevation profiles of the surrounding ridgelines. She studied them for 4 hours. She was looking for something. She didn't have a name for it yet, but she had learned over 17 confirmed kills in 2 full deployments, in a lifetime of being underestimated, that the thing that kills you is never the thing you plan for. The thing that kills you is the thing that doesn't quite fit, the anomaly, the small wrong note in an otherwise coherent piece of music. She was looking for the wrong note. At 200, she folded the maps, turned off her light, and slept. She slept for exactly 5 hours. At 600, Captain Foster introduced her to the squad in the operations room. It was a larger space than the mess hall cleaner, colder, the walls covered in maps and mission boards. 12 men stood in a rough semicircle that managed to exclude her without technically meaning to. The body language of men who had already made up their minds. Shoulders turned inward, eyes that slid past her or rested on her with the blunt assessment of people evaluating something foreign. Briggs stood at the center of the arc. Of course he did. Squad Harning, Foster said. Oh, this is Sergeant Ava Mitchell. She's joining us from the 4th Marines. She'll be our Overwatch specialist on the Caragol operation. He looked at the group with the measured steadiness of a man who was choosing his words carefully. I expect her to be integrated into the unit with the same professionalism this squad has always demonstrated. It was Ava noted a sentence designed to set a standard while acknowledging it was not already being met. Sir, several voices said in the flat, non-committal tone that soldiers use when they mean something different from what they're saying. Briggs said nothing. He just looked at her. That same look, the one that had decided something already. Foster ran through the mission parameters. The Caragol Valley route, medical supply convoy, moderate risk assessment from Intel, Overwatch position to be established on the northern ridge prior to convoy departure. During the briefing, Ava spoke once. Sir, she said, when Foster reached the elevation map of the valley, the northern ridge Overwatch gives good lines of sight to positions 1 through 3 on the eastern slope, but there's a blind spot at the valley's southern bend. She pointed to the map, a specific curve in the terrain where the elevation dropped before rising again. If there are elevated firing positions, here, and here she indicated 3 points along a ridgeline marked with nothing more notable than a standard elevation notation. The convoy is exposed for approximately 400 meters. The room went quiet in a different way than it had gone quiet the night before in the mess hall. This was the quiet of men who were recalibrating. Intel assessment rated that area low risk, Foster said. Yes, sir, she said. I'd still like to walk that terrain before the mission if possible. He studied her. I'll see what I can arrange, he said. Not a yes, not a no. The answer of a man who was taking her seriously but wasn't ready to show it yet. Briggs spoke for the first time since she had entered the room. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant, which was worse, she had learned, than when it was openly contemptuous. Sergeant Mitchell has concerns about the intel assessment, he said as if he were reporting a fact. Good to know someone's watching out for us, even if they don't know the valley yet. He smiled not at her but to the room, a performance of reasonableness, the most dangerous kind of dismissal because it came packaged as courtesy. We've run this route 4 times. We know what to watch for. She looked at him. Just looked. With respect, Staff Sergeant, she said, and her voice carried no heat at all. It was as flat and precise as a ruled line. The fact that it's been run 4 times means the enemy has studied it 4 times. Patterns are assets for both sides. The room was very, very quiet. Briggs's smile didn't change. But something behind his eyes did. Something tightened. Noted, he said. The days that followed operated on 2 levels simultaneously. The surface level, which was the visible grinding routine of a forward operating base, and the deeper level, which was something else entirely. On the surface, morning patrols, equipment, maintenance, briefings, meals. The ordinary texture of military life in a frozen hostile country. On the deeper level, a war of a different kind. Briggs continued his campaign with the patience of a man who had done it before and knew exactly how long it took to work. At breakfast on the second day, he accidentally bumped her tray, caught it before it fell, apologized with exaggerated gallantry, and made sure the entire mess hall saw him do it. The gesture was designed to say, she can't even hold a tray. I had to save her. The fact that she had not dropped it was irrelevant. The performance was not about what happened. It was about what people remembered. At the 3rd day's briefing, when she offered an observation about enemy troop movement patterns, she had noticed from the surveillance footage, he cut her off mid-sentence. We appreciate the input, Sergeant, he said with perfect polished condescension. We'll loop you in when we need the perspective. On the 4th day, he put a target poster on the wall of the common room with a circle drawn around the center and the words Snow Princess written across the top. He did it while she was on a patrol rotation. He did it so that it would be there when she came back. She walked past it without looking at it. She did not ask for it to be taken down. She did not report it. She did not say a single word. But that night she added 3 more locations to her map of the Caragol Valley. 3 more places where the terrain created elevation advantages she had not previously accounted for. She was building a picture. It wasn't complete yet, but it was getting there. Ethan Brooks found her in the operations center at 2100 that night, bent over her maps with a flashlight. He stopped in the doorway. He looked like he was deciding whether to keep walking. "You don't sleep," he said finally. She glanced up. "I sleep 5 hours. I've got time." He came in slowly, the way people approach something unfamiliar when they want to appear casual about it. He looked at the map spread across the table, the notations, the elevation marks, the small, precise symbols she had developed over 2 deployments to track information that didn't have standard military notation. "What are all these marks?" he said. "Observation data," she said. "From what? Surveillance footage? Environmental reports. The patrol logs from the last 6 months." She paused. "The ones that are publicly available anyway." He looked at her. "The ones that are publicly available." She went back to the map. "How long have you been in Kestrel, Corporal?" 8 months. "In 8 months, how many times have you noticed the wildlife behavior in the Caragol Valley?" He blinked. "The what?" "Wildlife," she said. "Birds, small mammals, activity patterns." She pointed to a section of her map that was annotated with a series of small, careful symbols. "In the last 3 months, surveillance footage shows a consistent pattern of wildlife displacement in the upper valley, specifically in the areas of highest elevation. Animals moving out of those zones and not returning." Brooks stared at the map, then at her, then back at the map. "That means something's up there," he said slowly. "Something that scared them off." "Something has been up there," she corrected. "Consistently, for at least 3 months." He was quiet for a long moment. "Briggs has run that valley 4 times, he said. "Not defending Briggs, just stating a fact." "I know," she said. "He's going to say you're overthinking it." "He's going to say a lot of things," she said. She rolled up a section of the map and smoothed the edge. "How long has he been squad leader?" Brooks hesitated just a fraction of a second, long enough for her to notice. 2 years, he said. "And before that post, where was he stationed?" Another hesitation, smaller this time. "But there. Bagram, I think. Before that, Kandahar." "Intelligence coordination," she said. He looked at her very carefully. "Why are you asking me that?" She looked back at her map. "No reason," she said. "Good night, Corporal." He stood there for another moment. He wanted to ask more. She could feel the weight of the unasked question in the room. But he didn't ask. He turned and walked out. After he was gone, she turned back to the map. She added a single notation in the lower right corner. Small, precise. She was getting closer to the wrong note. She could feel it. On the 6th day, something changed. It was not dramatic. It was not visible to anyone else. But Ava felt it the way she felt wind shifts, not intellectually, but in the body, in the nerves that had been trained to register anomaly before the conscious mind could name it. Briggs changed his pattern. For 5 days, his campaign against her had been consistent, predictable, public performative, calibrated to erode confidence in front of witnesses. But on the 6th day, he stopped. Not permanently, not even for a full day. But there was a 4-hour window in the early afternoon where she didn't feel his attention on her. She noted the time. She noted what he was doing during those 4 hours of meeting in Foster's outer office, a radio communication session in the signals room, a period of unaccounted time between 1340 and 1420. She noted all of it. And then she went back to her maps and added one more annotation. Because the 6-month pattern she had been tracking in the surveillance footage had a gap in it, a 6-week period where the wildlife displacement data went quiet before resuming. And the date of that gap matched almost exactly a period 3 months ago when the convoy route through Caragol had been changed at the last minute due to a credible threat assessment. A threat assessment that had come from the intelligence coordination team, of which Briggs had previously been a member. She sat very still for a long moment. The kind of stillness that happens when you have found the wrong note, and the wrong note turns out to be much, much worse than you anticipated. She did not panic. She did not move. She breathed slow and even, and she thought about what she was looking at and what it meant and what she needed to do about it. Then she got up, walked to the signals room, and sent a single encrypted message to a contact number she had memorized 18 months ago during a briefing in a basement room in Quantico that had no official record of ever having occurred. The message was 12 words long. She did not write it down. She walked back to her bunk, laid out her equipment, and checked every component with the same measured meditative care she always brought to the ritual. 8 days until the convoy. She had work to do. On the 7th night, Briggs came to find her. Not in the mess hall, not in the ops center, not in any of the shared spaces where his cruelty had an audience and therefore a purpose. He came to the corridor outside the female quarters at 22:30, when most of the base was settled into the pre-sleep quiet. He knocked, waited. She opened the door and looked at him. He was different without the audience. Smaller somehow. Not physically, he was still big, still carrying the weight of himself like a challenge. But the performance was turned off, and what was left underneath it was more complicated than she had expected. "I want to talk to you," he said. "You're talking to me," she said. He looked past her into the room for a moment, the maps, the equipment, the Spartan order of a space that belonged to someone who lived inside their own discipline. Then he looked back at her. "You're digging into things that aren't your business," he said. His voice was low, not threatening or not only threatening. There was something else in it, something that was almost warning. "My business is keeping the convoy alive," she said. "Your business is Overwatch, your position on the North Ridge, your sector of fire." He paused. "That's your business." "The North Ridge gives me sightlines into the valley," she said. "Everything in the valley is my business." He was quiet for a long moment. She waited. She was very good at waiting. "You're smart," he said finally. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of concern. "Too smart for your own good, maybe." "I've heard that before," she said. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, and she prided herself on reading expressions. There was contempt in it, yes, and something that might have been calculation. But underneath both of those things, something she hadn't expected. Fear, not of her, or not entirely of her. The fear of a man who was watching something approach that he thought he had control of, and realizing he may have been wrong. "The mission goes in 8 days," he said. "Do your job, that's all." "That's all I've ever done," she said. He looked at her for another long moment. Then he turned and walked away down the corridor. She closed the door, stood very still in the dark room for exactly 30 seconds. Then she went to her maps and added the final annotation, the one she had been building toward for 6 days. The picture was complete. She looked at it for a long time, and then she thought 8 days. Not enough time to stop what was already in motion. But maybe enough time to be in the right place when it happened. She turned off the light. She slept exactly 5 hours. 7 days before their convoy, Ava Mitchell woke at 0500 and lay still for exactly 60 seconds before she moved. It was a habit she had developed not from military training, but from something older. The discipline of a woman who had learned young and hard that the first 60 seconds of the day tell you what kind of day it's going to be if you're quiet enough to listen. Her father had taught her that. He had called it reading the room before the room reads you. Her father had been her sniper too. Had been. Past tense, a word that still caught in her chest sometimes like a splinter. She got up, she dressed, she went to work. The encrypted message she had sent 2 nights ago had received a response at 03:12, 3 words long, which she had committed to memory and then deleted. The 3 words were, "We see it." That was all. No instructions, no timeline, no next steps. Just confirmation that someone else somewhere else was looking at the same picture she was looking at and seeing the same thing. It was not reassuring exactly, but it was something. It was the difference between standing in the dark alone and standing in the dark knowing someone else was out there also watching. She went to the operations center at 05:30 before anyone else arrived. She pulled the surveillance footage from the Valley system for the past 72 hours and went through it frame by frame the way she always did, not looking for anything specific, but looking for everything, holding the images lightly so that the wrong thing would catch. It caught at the 47-minute mark, a thermal signature. Faint, upper left quadrant of the frame at the southern bend of the valley, exactly the blind spot she had flagged at the first briefing. The signature lasted 4 seconds and then disappeared. Not turned off. Disappeared. The way something disappears when it moves behind cover that's been deliberately positioned to block thermal imaging. She rewound and watched it again and again and a third time. Then she sat back and breathed through her nose for a long count, the way she did when the picture in her head shifted from hypothesis to conclusion. Someone had been in that valley. Someone who knew where the thermal coverage gaps were. Someone who had planned for the camera angles. That required either a very lucky guess or access to the surveillance grid layout. The surveillance grid layout was classified, eyes only, available to a very small number of people at FOB Kestrel. She noted the timestamp on the footage, 0218 local time. She noted the grid coordinates. She noted the exact angle of disappearance. Then she pulled up the duty roster for the previous night and ran her finger down the names. Briggs had been listed as on base, off rotation, in quarters. She closed the file. She sat very still, and she thought about the difference between what was documented and what was true and how much space there was between those two things when someone was careful enough. She was still sitting there when the door opened and Ethan Brooks came in early for the first time since she had arrived. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at the screen. He looked at her face. "What is it?" he said. She considered him for a moment. He was young, yes, and open-faced, yes. But she had been watching him for 6 days, and what she had seen was a man who was not stupid and who was not comfortable with what was happening around him. And those two qualities together made him something rare at FOB Kestrel, a person who might actually want to know the truth. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She didn't show him the thermal signature. She wasn't ready to do that yet. Instead, she said, "Tell me about the route change 3 months ago, the one on the Caragol mission." He looked at her with that expression, the one that was 2 parts curiosity and 1 part something he was working hard not to show. "How do you know about that?" "It's in the patrol log," she said. "Publicly available section." She paused. "Tell me how it happened. The mechanics of it. Who called it?" He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that happens when someone is deciding how much to trust. "It came down from intel coordination," he said finally. "Late-breaking threat assessment. Credible source," they said. "We rerouted through the eastern approach, added 4 hours to the trip, and put us through terrain that was harder to cover." Another pause. Briggs was the one who relayed it, said he'd confirmed it through his contacts. "His contacts," she repeated. Not a question, just repeating it to make it solid. "And the original route, the Caragol Valley route, did it run a medical convoy through eventually. 2 weeks later," he said, "smaller convoy, came through without incident." She nodded slowly. "So the threat assessment was wrong." "Or the threat was resolved by then," Brooks said. He was being careful, fair, giving the alternative explanation its due weight. "Or," she said, "the threat was positioned for a specific convoy and then stood down when the target wasn't there." The room was very quiet. Brooks looked at her for a long time. His open face was doing something complicated. She could see the pieces moving behind his eyes, the way he was picking up what she was putting down and fitting it against things he had seen and not known what to do with. "You're saying the threat assessment was manufactured," he said. His voice was very careful, very level. "I'm saying it's a question worth asking," she said. He looked at the screen in front of her, which was now showing the standard duty roster, nothing incriminating, nothing actionable. And then he looked at her, and she could see the exact moment when the thing he had been not quite thinking for 6 days took shape into something he could name. "What do you need from me?" he said, and that was how she knew she had an ally. She told him what she needed. Not everything, not the encrypted message, not the contact in Quantico, not the full shape of the picture she had built, but enough. Enough to make him useful. She needed him to watch Briggs's pattern over the next 6 days. Not obviously, not in any way that would register. She needed to know when he used the signals room, who he talked to in what order, and specifically whether there were any unaccounted gaps in his schedule that coincided with the surveillance blind windows in the valley. "That's a lot to track without looking like I'm tracking it," Brooks said. "You're a corporal," she said. "Nobody pays attention to what a corporal looks at. It's one of the few advantages of the rank." He almost smiled. Almost. "You don't miss much, do you?" "No," she said simply. "Not as a boast, just as a fact." He nodded. He stood up. He was at the door when she said quietly, "Brooks." He turned. "Don't write any of it down," she said. "Memorize it." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded again and walked out. She turned back to the screen. 6 days. She had a lot of work to do. The morning briefing at 700 was the usual structure: Foster at the front, mission, parameters, weather update, patrol assignments. Ava sat in her now established position at the outer edge of the room, which was not the position she preferred tactically, but was the position that gave her the widest view of everyone else in the space. She had stopped trying to choose the most defensible physical position a long time ago. What she chose instead was the position with the best information yield. Today that meant washing Briggs. He was performing normalcy with the particular skill of a man who had been doing it for a long time. The right amount of engagement during the briefing, not too much, not too little. A joke at the right moment. Appropriate attentiveness when Foster spoke. The body language of a man who is exactly where he belongs, doing exactly what he has always done. But 3 times during the 40-minute briefing, his eyes moved to the door, not checking who came in. The door stayed closed. He was checking the time relative to something that was supposed to happen or not happen, something he was tracking on an internal clock. She marked the moments. 7:14, 7:29, 7:41. After the briefing, she went to Foster's office. She knocked. He looked up from his desk with the expression of a man who is managing too many things and knows it. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said. "Sir," she said, "I'd like to request permission to do a terrain walk of the southern approach to the Caragol Valley before the mission. Specifically, the blind spot I flagged at the first briefing." He studied her. "Intel assessment. With respect, sir, the intel assessment was generated 3 months ago and has not been updated. Environmental conditions change. So does occupancy." She kept her voice level, not pressing, just precise. 2 hours on the ground would give me better Overwatch data than 6 months of satellite imagery. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him weighing it, the operational disruption of approving it against the tactical value of not approving it, and somewhere beneath both of those things, the simpler question of whether he trusted her. "Approved," he said, "tomorrow morning. Take Brooks with you." "Thank you, sir." She turned to go. "Mitchell." She turned back. He was looking at her with something more searching in his expression than usual. "You flagged that blind spot on your first day, before you'd seen the full mission plan." "Yes, sir." "How did you know to look there?" She considered him, considered how much to say. "I've seen the valley before," she said. "Not in person, in data, someone else's data." She paused. "My father's unit ran a mission through a similar valley system in 2009. They didn't know what was in the blind spot either." Foster was very still. "What happened?" "They found out," she said. She left the office. She walked back to the operations center. She sat down at her station and looked at the maps. Her father's name had been Master Sergeant David Mitchell. He had died in a valley not unlike Caragol, in a mission that had gone wrong in ways that intelligence failures go wrong, not with dramatic incompetence, but with the slow, quiet rot of compromised information reaching the wrong people at the right time. She had been 19. She had read every document she could access about what had happened. Most of them were classified, the ones that weren't told a partial story. The ones that were, she had not been able to read those, not officially. But she had been looking for the same signature ever since, the same pattern, the manufactured threat assessment, the convenient rerouting, the positioned ambush, the person on the inside who knew which information to poison and when to poison it. She had been looking for it for 10 years. And now at FOB Kestrel in the Caragol Valley, 6 days before a medical convoy, she was looking straight at it. She was also looking at the possibility that she was wrong. She held that possibility honestly the way she held any variable, not dismissing it, not inflating it, just keeping it in the frame. Because if she was wrong, she was about to create a significant amount of institutional disruption based on anomalous data and a personal history that could make her read patterns that weren't there. She knew this. She kept it in the frame. But the thermal signature at 0218, the surveillance grid knowledge required to position that way. The 3 route changes in 8 months, all relayed through Briggs, all occurring when the Intel coordination channel was active. That wasn't pattern recognition born of grief. That was a picture. She went back to work. The terrain walk the next morning was cold in a way that had a physical weight to it, the kind of cold that pressed down on the shoulders and made every step a small act of will. She and Brooks moved through the eastern approach to the valley without speaking for the first 20 minutes, which suited her perfectly. She was reading the ground, and the ground required her full attention. She was looking for what was there, and more importantly, what wasn't there. The wildlife absence that she had tracked on surveillance footage was confirmed on the ground within the first kilometer. No tracks in the snow of the smaller animals that should have been moving through this terrain. No bird activity in the tree line. The silence of a place that had been made inhospitable by something the cameras couldn't fully capture. "It's quiet," Brooks said. "Yes," she said. "Too quiet or just cold quiet." She looked at him. "What's your gut say?" He looked at the tree line. He was quiet for a moment. "Too quiet," he said. And there was something in the way he said it, not dramatic, not performed, but genuine. The quiet discomfort of a man whose instincts were telling him something his training hadn't given him a category for. "Trust that," she said. "Don't reason yourself out of it." They moved to the southern bend, the blind spot. She stood at the exact point where the terrain created the coverage gap and looked up at the ridgeline. She turned slowly, mapping angles, measuring distances in the practiced automatic way that had become as natural to her as breathing. She identified 3 natural elevated positions that could cover the entire 400-meter exposure window of the convoy route. Then she identified a 4th, then a 5th, 5 positions, all of them with clear sight lines to the convoy route, all of them accessible from the northern approach through terrain that would shield movement from the base's surveillance coverage. All of them within range of coordinated fire that would, if executed simultaneously, create a kill zone that the convoy could not break out of in either direction. She stood there in the cold silence and felt the absolute certainty of it settle into her. Like temperature equalization, the body reaching the same temperature as its environment. There was no longer any question in her mind. This was not a hypothetical. This was a plan, already in place, already positioned. The question was when. "I need you to do something for me tonight," she said to Brooks without looking away from the ridgeline. "What?" "Check the signals log for the last 48 hours. Not the classified section, just the open log. I need to know if there were any outgoing transmissions to the external coordination channel between 0200 and 0300. He was quiet for a moment. "That's not something I can access without a reason." "You're doing a communications check for the convoy mission," she said. "That's your reason." He didn't respond immediately. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the ridgeline too, and his expression had changed. The open-faced young man curiosity was still there, but something harder had come up underneath it. The expression of someone who has stopped trying to make sense of something and started simply deciding what to do about it. "If I find what you think I'm going to find," he said slowly, "what happens next?" "You bring it to me," she said. "Just me, nobody else. Not Foster." She looked at him steadily. "Not yet." His jaw worked. She could see him processing that the implication beneath it, the reason she wasn't ready to go to Foster yet. "You don't know how far it goes," he said quietly. "I'm working on knowing," she said. He nodded once. The nod of a man who has made a decision and is done deliberating. They walked back to the base in the same silence they had walked out in, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say, but the silence of 2 people carrying the same weight and knowing it. That evening, Briggs resumed his performance. Dinner in the mess hall, the usual table, the usual audience, the usual slow-burning contempt calibrated for maximum erosion. He had apparently decided that the previous night's corridor conversation had not produced the desired effect, that whatever warning he had delivered had not landed the way he intended, and so he reverted to the reliable tool of public humiliation. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said as she carried her tray past his table, "heard you took a walk in the valley this morning. Sightseeing." His table obliged with the expected laughter. "Hope you didn't get lost. It's a big place for someone who's new to it." She stopped. She set her tray down on the nearest surface. She turned and looked at him with the full, undivided, absolutely steady attention that she normally reserved for a target at distance, the complete focusing of every faculty on a single point. "I counted 5 positions," she said. The laughter died. He looked at her. His expression did not change. It was a skilled, trained non-change, the face of someone who has practiced this, who has learned to keep the surface still when the water underneath is moving. 5 positions, he repeated. His voice was mild, almost curious. "What positions?" "Elevated firing positions," she said. "Southern bend, covering the full exposure window." She held his eyes. "I haven't run the numbers yet on coordinated fire coverage. I'll have that by tomorrow." He was quiet for 3 full seconds. In a room that had gone completely still, 3 seconds is a very long time. "Good work, Sergeant," he said finally, still mild, still smooth. "That's what we brought you here for." She picked up her tray and walked to her table. She ate her dinner. She didn't taste any of it. Because she had just done something very deliberate and very risky. She had told Briggs exactly what she knew and exactly how far along she was in knowing it. Not because she wanted him to know, but because she wanted to see what he did with that information in the next 12 hours. When a man knows he's running out of time, he moves faster. When he moves faster, he makes mistakes. And mistakes leave evidence that 5 days of patient, careful observation hadn't yet produced. She needed him to move. At 22:30, Brooks came to her door. He didn't knock loudly. 2 soft knocks the way she had told him that morning without telling him. She opened the door. He was pale. Not the pale of cold. The pale of a man who has found something he wished he hadn't. "The signals log," he said. His voice was low, very low. There were 3 transmissions to the external coordination channel, 0208, 0221, and 0247. She had sent the encrypted message to Quantico at 0300, which meant that whatever was being transmitted through that channel, the last transmission had gone out less than 15 minutes before she had sent her own. "The sender code on the transmissions," she said. "Did you see it?" He nodded. He looked sick. "It was Briggs's authentication code," he said. She stood very still. Not out of shock, she had built to this piece by piece, and the conclusion was not a surprise. She was still, because she was thinking precisely and rapidly about what came next, about the 6 days remaining before the convoy, about the 5 positions in the valley, about the 3-word response from Quantico, about Foster and how much she could tell him and when, and whether the circle of compromise extended further than one sergeant, or whether it stopped with Briggs and whoever Briggs reported to. "We see it," the message had said. That meant there was a case being built, an investigation already in motion, which meant that if she moved too early, if she went to Foster now, if Briggs was arrested or flagged tonight, whoever was on the other end of those transmissions would know immediately. The network would seal itself. The evidence would disappear. The ambush that was being built in the Carrigal Valley would be dismantled and rebuilt somewhere else, and the people who had designed it would walk away clean. She needed the network, not just Briggs, the network. And the only way to get the network was to let the convoy go. She understood with the cold clarity of someone who has run the calculation and arrived at an answer they don't like what that meant. It meant 6 more days of watching Briggs operate freely. It meant walking that convoy into that valley, knowing what was waiting in it. It meant trusting that she could be in position, that she could cover 5 firing points, that she could keep those men alive, while simultaneously creating the conditions for Briggs to expose himself completely. It meant trusting herself with other people's lives in a way she had only ever done once before and had never fully made peace with. She looked at Brooks. "What you just told me," she said, "does not leave this room. You don't write it down. You don't say it to anyone. You don't change how you act around Briggs tomorrow morning or any morning after that." Ava. It was the first time he had used her first name. He said it quietly, like something that cost him. "If people go into that valley and—" "They won't," she said. He looked at her. "You don't know that." "No," she said. "I know it the way I know any shot. Preparation, position, timing. I don't know it the way you know your own name. I know it the way a calculation comes out on the right side." She held his eyes. 6 days. I need 6 days." He was silent for a long moment. She could see the war in him, the basic human desire to do something immediate, to raise the alarm, to protect the people around him from something he could now see coming. The impulse toward direct action that was in this case the most dangerous thing he could do. "Trust me," she said. It was not a plea. It was a statement. The same flat, precise quality as everything else she said. He closed his eyes briefly. "Open them." 6 days, he said. She nodded. He left. She closed the door and went to her maps. She stood over them in the dark for a long time, looking at the 5 positions she had marked, looking at the lines she had drawn between them, the angles, the distances, the timing calculations that existed only in her head because she had not written them down. 5 positions, 1 sniper, 1 narrow window. She had never attempted anything like it. She had also never had a reason like this one. She turned off the light. She lay down. She breathed. She thought about her father in the valley that had taken his unit and the 10 years she had spent learning everything there was to know about how that kind of operation worked. And she thought, not this time. Then she stopped thinking and went to sleep. 5 hours. She had work to do tomorrow. 6 days before the convoy, Ava woke at 0500, and the first thing she did was lie still and count what she had. She counted it the way you count ammunition before a long patrol. Not because you enjoy the inventory, but because the inventory is the difference between getting home and not getting home. She had the thermal signature. She had the transmission logs. She had Brooks. She had 5 positions mapped in her head with the precision of something she had memorized, the way other people memorize the faces of people they love. And she had one more thing, something she hadn't told Brooks, hadn't told anyone, something that had arrived in a second encrypted message at 0412 that morning, 4 words long this time, 4 words that changed the shape of everything. The message said, "Convoy date is wrong." She had read it 3 times. Then she had sat in the dark and worked through what it meant. The official convoy date was in 6 days. If the convoy date was wrong, if someone had fed a different date to the external coordination channel, then the ambush in the Caragol Valley was not timed for the actual convoy. It was timed for a different window, either earlier or later, and the only way to know which was to know what Briggs had transmitted in those 3 early morning communications. Which meant she needed the content of the transmissions, not just the timestamps, which meant she needed access to the signals room, which meant she needed a reason to be in the signals room that Briggs would not find suspicious. She got up at 0520. She dressed. She thought about it for exactly 8 minutes. Then she went to find Captain Foster. He was already at his desk, which she had come to understand was where he spent most of his waking hours, a man who processed the world through paperwork and plans, who found the act of organizing information more manageable than the act of managing people. She respected that. It was a recognizable quality. "Sir," she said, "I need to review the communications protocol for Overwatch coordination during the convoy mission, specifically the backup frequencies in case primary goes down." She paused. "I'd like to do a signals room check today, standard pre-mission verification." He looked at her over his paperwork. "That's a maintenance officer function." "Yes, sir, but Overwatch lives or dies on communications. If I'm cut off from the convoy on the North Ridge, I need to know every backup option available." She kept her voice neutral, professional, the voice of someone doing their job very thoroughly. "It takes an hour." He considered her for a long moment. She waited perfectly still. "Approved," he said. "Coordinate with Specialist Chen." "Thank you, sir." Specialist Diane Chen was 24 years old and had the focused, slightly harried energy of someone who was very good at their job and perpetually annoyed that other people weren't as good at theirs. She looked at Ava's approval authorization with the quick, practiced eye of someone who processed paperwork the way Ava processed terrain, automatically, efficiently looking for what didn't fit. "Pre-mission comms check," Chen said. "Okay, you want the full backup frequency list or just primary alternates?" "Full list," Ava said. "And while I'm here, can I pull the transmission log for the last 48 hours? I want to make sure there's no channel congestion during our primary operational windows." Chen shrugged. "Sure, Terminal 3. Ava sat at Terminal 3. She pulled the transmission log. She found what she was looking for in 4 minutes, not the content of the transmissions, which was encrypted above her clearance level, but the routing codes. The specific routing codes that indicated which external node the transmissions had been directed to. She memorized the codes, all 3 of them. Then she closed the log, completed her legitimate communications check, thanked Chen, and walked out of the signals room. In the corridor, she stopped. She stood against the wall and looked at the ceiling and turned the routing codes over in her mind. The 3rd code, the one from the 0247 transmission, the last one before she had sent her own message to Quantico, was different from the first 2. The first 2 routed to the standard external intelligence coordination node. The 3rd one routed somewhere else, somewhere she didn't immediately recognize. But she knew how to find out. She went back to her bunk. She took out the notation she had memorized from the second encrypted message. She compared the routing identifier in that message to the routing code from the 0247 transmission. They matched. She sat with that for a full minute, not because she needed a minute to process it, but because what it meant was significant enough to deserve a full minute of stillness. The 0247 transmission had gone to the same node that the Quantico contact was monitoring, which meant the contact already had it, which meant they already knew the content, which meant the 4 words convoy date is wrong were not a warning about compromised scheduling. They were a confirmation. Briggs had transmitted the wrong date deliberately. He had told whatever network he was feeding that the convoy was happening on a different day. He was not trying to time the ambush to the actual convoy. He was creating a window of time when the real convoy, would go in without the network's knowledge. A window where the ambush was not active. She stopped. She went back through that logic very carefully because it had just turned the picture inside out in a way that mattered enormously. If Briggs was feeding the network wrong information, if he was sending a false convoy date, then either he was protecting the convoy or he was creating a trap of a different kind. Not an ambush on the convoy. Something else. Something that required the convoy to go in without the network watching. She did not know which it was yet, but it changed things. At 1100 that morning, Briggs found her in the operations center. He came in without knocking, the privilege of seniority deployed casually, and stood on the other side of the table from her with his arms at his sides and his expression doing something she hadn't seen it do before. Not contempt, not calculation, not warning. Something more unreadable than any of those. "You went to the signals room this morning," he said. "Not a question." "Pre-mission communications check," she said. "Approved by Captain Foster." "I know it was approved." He looked at the maps in front of her, not her face. "The maps. You're very thorough." "That's why they sent me here," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which she had not expected. He sat the way big men sometimes sit when they've decided to change tactics, not relaxed but deliberate, taking up space as a negotiating position rather than a display. "I'm going to tell you something," he said. His voice was different, lower. The performance was still off the way it had been in the corridors 6 nights ago, but what was underneath it was also different now. The fear she had seen before was still there, but it had company. It had something that looked disturbingly like urgency. "I'm listening," she said. He looked at her directly. "The network you're looking for. The one you've been building a picture of since you got here." He stopped. Let that sit. Let her absorb the fact that he knew she was building a picture. "It's bigger than Kestrel, bigger than this valley, bigger than anything you'll be able to document in 6 days. She kept her face completely neutral. "I don't know what you're referring to, Staff Sergeant." "Yes, you do." He said it simply, not angrily. "Your father's unit, 2009, that's why you're here." He leaned forward slightly. "I know because I was in Kandahar in 2009. I wasn't part of what happened, but I saw enough of the edges of it to know what it was, and I've been looking at the same edges ever since." Another pause, longer this time. "The convoy date I transmitted to the external channel last night. It's wrong." The room seemed to contract slightly. She kept breathing. She kept her hands flat on the table. "I know," she said. His eyes changed, just barely, the smallest recalibration. "How do you know?" "Because someone told me," she said. He stared at her for 3 full seconds. "Who?" She looked at him steadily. "Someone who's been building a bigger picture than either of us for longer than either of us." She paused. "The routing code on your 0247 transmission. You know where it went." He was very still. "I sent it there deliberately." "I know," she said again. The silence between them was the most complex silence she had experienced since arriving at FOB Kestrel. It was the silence of 2 people who had been operating in parallel in the same problem without knowing it, and who were now suddenly and uncomfortably in the same room looking at the same map. "You're not working with the network," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," he said, "but they think you are." "They recruited me 2 years ago," he said, "in Bagram." I said yes. "I've been feeding them information ever since." He paused. "Carefully selected information. Mostly wrong." She sat back. She took a slow breath. "And the ambush in the valley is real," he said. "The positions are real. The coordination is real. I didn't set it up. I found it 3 weeks ago. I've been trying to build enough evidence to expose the full network without tipping off the people at the top." He looked at her with something that was not quite appeal and not quite desperation, but contained elements of both. "If I go to Foster now, they'll know within 24 hours. The people above the people who set up those positions. They'll disappear. The network goes dark." And if the convoy goes into the valley, she said. It doesn't, he said. That's what the false date was for. I bought 5 days. The positions will be manned on the date I gave them. The convoy won't be there. I have 5 days to complete the evidence package. She looked at him for a long time. She was running 2 calculations simultaneously, the one about whether she believed him and the one about whether it mattered if she did. Because even if he was telling the truth, the positions in the valley were real. The network was real. And a man who had spent 2 years feeding information to the enemy, regardless of the quality of that information, was a man who had operated outside every boundary of trust that military service was built on. The public humiliation, she said, was that real? He almost looked ashamed. I needed you to look like a problem. If the network thought I was managing you, keeping you isolated and undermined, they wouldn't flag you as a threat. He held her eyes. I knew you were coming. Your contact in Quantico sent a signal 3 days before you arrived. I picked it up on the monitoring channel. Another pause. I've been trying to protect you while making it look like the opposite. She thought about the target poster in the common room, the tray at breakfast, the Snow Princess performance repeated daily for 6 days in front of witnesses. She thought about how it had felt each time to be the object of it, not emotionally because she had trained herself past that, but tactically the way it had shaped the perceptions of everyone around her, the way it had placed her in a particular box in every mind on the base. She thought about whether that protection was also control. I don't need protecting, she said. No, he said. I know that now. He glanced at the maps. The 5 positions you identified. You counted them right. A beat. How did you know there were 5? Terrain logic, when she said. If I were setting up a kill zone in that valley with maximum coverage and minimum exposed approach, I'd use those 5 points. It's the only configuration that closes all exits. She paused. Someone with sniper training set those positions. He nodded. Former military. The network recruits from inside, always has. He looked at his hands for a moment. The senior coordinator for the network's operational arm. He's the one who positioned those points. He's the one I've been trying to identify for 2 years. She was very still. And have you? He met her eyes. Almost, he said. That's why I need the 5 days. She looked at him for a long time. The calculation was still running. Trust was a variable she had always kept low, not out of cynicism, but out of the simple operational reality that trust miscalibrated gets people killed. But she was also looking at a man who had just handed her his exposure, laid it out on the table between them, and that was either the most honest thing she had seen at FOB Kestrel or the most sophisticated manipulation. She did not know which yet. Brooks, she said, he found your authentication code on the transmission logs. Briggs closed his eyes briefly. I know. I flagged it too late. He opened his eyes. Is he going to move on it? He's waiting on my direction, she said. Something passed through Briggs's expression, something she might have called relief in a less complicated situation. Then we have 5 days, he said. 3 are free, she corrected. He looked at her. The Quantico contact gave you a different timeline. The Quantico contact confirmed the false date, she said. But the network's surveillance of Kestrel is not limited to Briggs's transmissions. There are other monitoring channels. The window I have before they recalibrate their timeline is narrower than 5 days. She pulled the map toward her and pointed to the valley's southern bend. I need the identity of the network coordinator before the convoy goes in, and I need it in a form that Foster can act on without tipping the upper network. He stared at the map, his jaw worked. 3 days is not. 3 days is what we have, she said, not harshly, just flatly. The way she said everything that was simply true. What do you have on the coordinator so far? He reached into his jacket. He produced a small folded piece of paper, not digital, not transmittable, not interceptable. Handwritten. She looked at it. It was a partial communications pattern, routing codes, timestamps, transmission durations. The kind of thing you build slowly over months of careful monitoring. The kind of thing that becomes at a certain point of density and identity. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at him. I've seen one of these codes before, she said carefully. Where? She set the paper down. In the signals room this morning, in the routing log. She paused. The code appears in 3 transmissions over the last 2 weeks. The sender authentication on those transmissions is not yours. He was very, very still. Whose is it? She looked at him with the steadiness that she brought to everything. The steadiness that was not coldness, but precision. The steadiness that her father had called reading the room before the room reads you, and which she had come to understand was not a skill you were born with, but one you built year by year, loss by loss, until it became the thing that kept you standing. I need to verify it, she said. I'm not going to say a name until I've verified it. He stared at her. Ava. It was the second time someone had used her first name since she had arrived. Both times it had been used the same way as a word with weight behind it, a word being used because the speaker needed her to hear something real. I've been looking at this network for 2 years, he said. If you know who's running the operational arm, if you have a code that traces to a sender on this base, I need to know. She looked at him steadily. Then give me 12 hours, she said, and trust me. A long moment. He looked at the map, then at her. I've been trusting you longer than you know, he said quietly. She did not respond to that. She folded the paper and held it out to him. He took it. He stood. At the door, he turned back and she spoke before he could. Briggs, she said. He stopped. The cruelty. All of it. When this is over, people are going to remember it. She looked at him with no anger in it, just the flat truth of what she was saying. There's a cost to what you chose, whatever your reason was. He held her gaze. For the first time since she had met him, he looked like a man who was carrying something heavy and had been carrying it for a very long time. I know, he said. I know there is. He left. She turned back to the maps. She looked at the routing code she had memorized from the signals room. She looked at the transmission pattern from Briggs's paper. She laid them against each other in her mind with the same precision she used to calculate wind compensation. At long range, all the variables held simultaneously, the answer emerging not from a single calculation, but from the relationship between all of them. The sender authentication on those 3 transmissions, the timing of them, the content routing pattern that matched the senior network coordinator's signature that Briggs had been building for 2 years. She needed 12 hours to verify it formally, but she already knew. In the same way she always knew preparation position timing. She had found the wrong note, and the wrong note was someone she had not expected. She would not say who yet, not to Briggs, not to Brooks, not to herself, even in any explicit formulation that could be taken from her if things went wrong in the next 3 days. But she sat with the knowledge of it in the operations center, alone with the maps spread out in front of her, and the cold light of a Hindu Kush afternoon pushing through the window above the door, and she felt the weight of it settle into her, the way all real things settle, not lightly, not easily, but with the permanence of something true. 3 days, she went to work. 3 days, that was the number she worked with now, not 6, not 5-3, because the network's monitoring window was narrower than anyone had calculated, and Ava Mitchell had not survived 2 deployments and 17 confirmed kills by working with comfortable numbers. She worked with real ones. The 12 hours she had asked Briggs for passed in a single sustained act of concentration that she later would not be able to fully reconstruct in sequence because it was not sequential. It was simultaneous, multiple threads of verification running in parallel, each one requiring the kind of attention that most people could only give to one thing at a time, and which she had learned to distribute across several without losing the resolution on any of them. At 2200, she had the routing code cross-referenced against the signals log going back 4 months. At 2310, she had the transmission duration pattern matched against a specific operational rhythm that appeared in the Intelligence Coordination records she had accessed through a clearance channel that the Quantico contact had opened for her in the second encrypted message, buried in the technical header like a key left under a mat. At 0015, she had the sender authentication confirmed against the name. She sat with the name for a long time. Then she got up, washed her face with cold water from the basin, looked at herself in the metal surface that served as a mirror, and said quietly to no one, "Okay, okay." She went back to work. At 0200, she sent a single encrypted message to Quantico. 11 words. The name, the routing confirmation, in 3 words that she had never sent in an operational communication before I need authorization. What she was asking for was not the kind of thing that could be done quietly. What she was asking for required Foster. Required a chain of command that could move fast enough to close the network before it detected the pressure and sealed. Required most critically, someone at a level above FOB Kestrel to make the call she was not authorized to make herself. The response came at 0318, 6 words. Authorization granted. Trust your judgment. Go. She looked at those 6 words for exactly 30 seconds. Then she folded that channel closed, put on her boots, and went to find Captain Foster. It was 0330 in the morning when she knocked on his door. He answered in 40 seconds, which told her he either slept lightly or hadn't been sleeping at all. He looked at her face in the dim corridor light, and whatever he saw there made him step back immediately and open the door wider without asking any questions. That was the moment she decided she could trust him. She walked in, he closed the door. She sat down across from his desk, and she told him everything. Not the performance of telling, not the careful, strategic, partial disclosure she had been doing for 6 days. Everything. The thermal signature, the transmission logs, the 5 positions in the valley. Briggs and what Briggs had told her and what she believed about Briggs based on 6 days of watching him in one very long afternoon conversation. The routing codes, the 12 hours of verification, the name. When she said the name, Foster sat very still for 3 full seconds. Then he said quietly, "Are you certain?" "Yes, sir," she said. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for a moment, not avoiding her, she understood. Processing. Doing the thing that careful men do when they receive information that requires them to rebuild a structure they thought was solid. She had seen it before. It took a specific kind of man to do it quickly and without denial. Foster was that kind. He turned around. "The convoy," he said. "Goes in on schedule," she said. "If we change it now, the network knows we know. Everything disappears. Everyone who set those positions in the valley walks away. If the convoy goes into that valley, I'll be on the North Ridge," she said. "I've mapped all 5 positions. I know the wind rotation windows for that ridge line. I know the timing." She paused. "I can cover it, sir." He looked at her with the expression of a man who was calculating probability and not entirely liking the numbers. 5 positions, Ava, 1 shooter. It was the first time he had used her first name. She noted it without making anything of it. "Yes, sir," she said. "That's never been done." "No, sir." He looked at her for a long moment. "And you've run the numbers?" "In my head, yes, every day for 6 days." He walked back to his desk. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the surface the way he always did when he was about to say something definitive. "What do you need from me?" She told him. She needed the convoy to run exactly as planned, with no changes to personnel or timing that would register as anomalous. She needed the arrest procedure for the name she had given him to be executed simultaneously with the convoy's entry into the valley, not before, not after. Simultaneously so that the network coordinator could not transmit a warning to the valley positions. She needed Brooks assigned to the arrest team, because Brooks was the only other person on the base who knew the shape of this and could be trusted to move without hesitation. And she needed Foster to personally manage the internal communications during the convoy operation, because the backup channel that the network coordinator had access to ran through the base communication system, and if that channel fired a single transmission during the operation, everything she was trying to build would come apart. Foster listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "And Briggs," she had thought about this. "Briggs operates with the convoy as normal," she said. "He knows the valley. He knows what's in it. If he's telling me the truth about what he's been doing for 2 years, he's the person most likely to keep the convoy's ground element calm during the initial contact." She paused. "And if he's not telling me the truth, if this whole conversation was a manipulation, then having him in the valley where I can see him is better than having him on the base where I can't." Foster absorbed that. "That's a cold calculation." "Yes, sir," she said. "It is." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father," he said, "David Mitchell, I know the file. I knew about you before you arrived. I requested you specifically." He held her eyes. "Not because of his unit, because of the report you filed after Kandahar. The pattern recognition assessment you submitted through unofficial channels that nobody acted on." She was very still. "You read that report?" "I read it 6 months ago," he said. "It took me 4 months to get authorization to bring you here through a channel that didn't touch the intelligence coordination system." He paused. "I've been building a case too, Sergeant, for 6 months. I just didn't have the final piece." She looked at him. The picture was expanding again the way it had when she had cross-referenced the routing codes and found the name. Foster had not been the passive, cautious, professionally non-committal officer she had been reading him as. He had been something much more patient and much more deliberate, a man who had been running his own parallel operation in his own way and who had brought her here not just as an Overwatch asset, but as the piece that could close what he couldn't close alone. "You knew," she said slowly. "Not the name, but the shape of it." "Yamau," he said. "How long have you known there was someone inside the base?" "4 months," he said. "I couldn't move on it without the transmission verification. I couldn't get to the transmission logs without tripping a monitoring flag." He looked at her steadily. "You could, because you came in from outside the system. Clean clearance. No existing flags." She sat with that for a moment. The understanding of how she had been used not manipulatively but deliberately as a tool for a purpose that aligned with her own was not comfortable exactly. But it was honest, and she had always been able to work with honesty better than with comfort. "The convoy goes in at 700 day after tomorrow," Foster said. "That gives us 48 hours. 48 hours, she confirmed. "I'll handle the arrest authorization. Brooks gets the assignment." He paused. "And Ava, what you're proposing on that ridge, 5 positions. Alone." "Yes, sir. I can't officially authorize that as a tactical plan. What I'm authorizing is Overwatch at the North Ridge position." He held her gaze. "What happens when you're up there is your call." "Understood," she said. She stood. She was at the door when he spoke. "Mitchell." She turned. He looked at her with something that was not quite sentiment and not quite apology, but that lived in the same neighborhood as both. "I'm sorry it took this long to tell you why you were really here." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You put me where I needed to be, sir. That's enough." She walked out into the corridor. The base was completely quiet. 0345. She had perhaps 2 hours before the day shift stirred and the surface performance of Phoebe Kestrel resumed. She used those 2 hours to go to the North Ridge approach path and walk it twice in the dark, committing every step to muscle memory. Not because she hadn't already done it mentally, but because there is a difference between knowing a path in your mind and knowing it in your legs. And on the day of the convoy, she would not have time to think about where her feet were going. Her feet needed to already know. The next 48 hours operated at a frequency that was almost unbearably controlled. Ava moved through the base's daily routine with the same measured, unhurried quality that had unsettled Briggs from the first day morning. Briefings, meals, equipment checks. While underneath that surface, she was running a continuous internal calibration. Wind data for the valley updated every 6 hours from the weather monitoring station. Elevation adjustments for the 5 firing positions she had mapped. Timing sequences for the rotation windows, the gaps in the wind cycle, when a shot from the North Ridge would be clean and true and undeflected. She was building a shooting solution in her head the way some people build structures out of physical materials, testing each connection, each load point, until the whole thing held. On the morning of the day before the convoy, Brooks found her at 0615. He fell into step beside her without announcement the way he had learned to do, matching her pace, moving alongside her rather than toward her, which was the approach of a man who had learned that she did not like to feel cornered even by friendliness. "Foster briefed me," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "The arrest team, simultaneous with convoy entry." He was quiet for a moment. "I can do that." "I know you can," she said. He glanced at her sideways. "The North Ridge," he said. 5 positions." She kept walking. "Yes." "Oh." He said her name the same way he always did, like a weight he was picking up carefully. "If one of those positions fires before you're set, if the timing is off by 30 seconds, then I adjust," she said. "That's not—" "Brooks." She stopped walking. He stopped with her. She turned and looked at him directly, and she said something she had not said to anyone since she had arrived at FOB Kestrel. Not because she needed to reassure him she didn't operate that way, but because he had earned it, this open-faced young man who had chosen the harder path every time it had presented itself, and who was now going to walk into a very difficult 12 hours on the strength of her word alone. "I've been running the numbers on those 5 positions every day for 6 days. I know the distances. I know the wind rotation down to 40-second cycles. I know exactly where each position is relative to my firing solution from the North Ridge." She held his eyes. I'm not going up there hoping. I'm going up there knowing. He looked at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing that thing they did, that complicated, moving, transparent thing that made his face such a poor poker face and such a good human face. Okay, he said finally. Okay. They walked on. That evening, the last evening before the convoy, Briggs came to the operations center at 2100. He didn't come looking for her specifically or perform not looking for her specifically, which was effectively the same thing. He came in, checked the mission board, made a notation on the convoy personnel list, and was almost out the door when she said, without looking up from her maps, "The false date you transmitted. The network will realize it's wrong within 6 hours of the convoy entering the valley." He stopped. "I know. 6 hours isn't enough time for them to reactivate the positions," she said, "but it's enough time for the senior coordinator to transmit a secondary alert to an external element, which means the evidence package needs to be fully documented and transmitted before the convoy enters," he said, "which means the arrest happens at 0700 exactly," she said, "not 0701, not 0659. He turned and looked at her. In the flat light of the operations center, he looked older than he usually did, the 2 years of what he had been carrying showing through the performance, the way age shows through makeup at the end of a long day. "Mitchell," he said. "Briggs," she said. "On the ridge tomorrow." He paused. "I've been in that valley 4 times. I know what those positions look like from the convoy's perspective." Another pause. "You're going to need at least 12 minutes on the ridge before the convoy enters to be fully set." "I know," she said. "I'm departing at 0530. The convoy goes at 0700, which gives me 90 minutes on the ridge," she said. "I only need 12. Something moved through his expression that she would have called respect in someone with a simpler history. "5 positions," he said. "5 positions," she confirmed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly something she had not expected from him. "Your father would be proud of you." He said it quickly and without decoration, the way men say true things they are not comfortable saying. And then he walked out before she could respond. She sat very still for a moment after he left. She did not let herself feel it fully, not then, not the night before a mission of this complexity, but she noted it, filed it away, in the place where she kept the things that were true and that mattered and that she would deal with when there was time to deal with them properly. She went back to the maps. She ran the numbers one more time. Everything held. At 0430 on the morning of the convoy, she woke dressed and performed her equipment check with the slow meditative precision that she always brought to it. Rifle. Scope cleaned and calibrated the night before and not touched since. Rounds counted, temperature adjusted, seated in sequence. Field kit, radio set to the convoy frequency. Everything in its place. Everything exactly as it needed to be. At 500, she went to find Brooks. He was already in gear. His face was pale and his jaw was set, and he looked like a man who has made his peace with a difficult thing and is now simply waiting for it to begin. She put a hand on his shoulder briefly, firmly, the way her father used to put a hand on her shoulder, before something hard, which was neither a hug nor a handshake, but something that meant, "I see you and I know you can do this." Then she removed her hand and said, 0700, not 0701. 0700, he said. "Not 0701. She nodded. She picked up her rifle. She walked to the North Ridge approach path. The approach took 23 minutes. She knew this because she had walked it twice in the dark 2 nights ago and had counted her paces and converted them to time. She reached the ridge at 0553, which gave her 67 minutes before the convoy entered the valley, 55 more than she needed to be set. She found her position. She settled in. She let the cold enter her body until she and the cold were the same temperature, because a shooter who is fighting the cold is a shooter who is not fully present for the shot. Then she looked through the scope at the valley below. At 0612, she saw movement at position 2. Small, disciplined, a professional settling in. She noted the time, adjusted her solution marginally, held. At 0631, she saw movement at position 4. Different body signature brought her slower. Different shooter. She noted it, adjusted, held. At 0649, positions 1 and 3 showed simultaneous settling activity, coordinated, timed. These were people who had done this before, who communicated without signals because they had rehearsed the timing until it was internal. 4 positions. She was watching 4 of the 5, and she could not yet see position 5, the deep command position at 980 meters, the one that required not just skill, but the kind of cold, patient stillness that only certain kinds of people could maintain, the kind that gave orders, the kind that waited until everyone else had committed. At 0653, her radio clicked twice. Foster's signal. The arrest was in progress. At 6:58, her radio clicked once. The arrest was complete. At 700, the convoy entered the valley. She breathed. She slowed her heart rate with the deliberate, practiced ease of someone who has done it so many times that the autonomic system has learned to follow the conscious intention. She picked up position 1 in her scope. Held. She calculated the wind at that moment, 12 knots north, northwest, a 3-degree deflection compensation at that distance. She adjusted. She held. The convoy's lead vehicle reached the 400-meter exposure window. Position 1 moved to fire. She was already ahead of it. The shot was clean. Position 1 went still. Across the valley position, 2 responded not with fire but with adjustment, moving for a better angle, which was exactly what she had predicted and had already accounted for in the second solution she had been holding alongside the first. She transitioned. The wind shifted 2 degrees in the rotation window she had memorized. She corrected in real time the way a musician corrects pitch instinctively and without interrupting the flow. The second shot was as clean as the first. Position 2 went still. On the radio, she heard Foster's voice, tight controlled. Convoy report. From below, Briggs's voice, RPG on lead vehicle, were pinned. 2 men down, taking fire from the eastern ridge. That was position 3 opening up, which meant position 3 had not seen what happened to 1 and 2, which meant her position was still clean. She transitioned. Position 3 was at 600 meters, the longest she had yet attempted under these conditions, and there was a 4-second window in the wind rotation coming in 11 seconds. She counted. She breathed. She waited for the window with the absolute, consuming patience of someone who understands that rushing a shot at 600 meters does not produce a faster result. It produces a miss, and she did not miss. The window came. She fired. Position 3 went still. The valley below was chaos in the way. Combat is always chaos, loud, fragmented, terrifying in its randomness. She could hear it on the radio, the overlapping transmissions, the voices of men trying to impose order on something that was actively resisting order. She heard Briggs directing fire, keeping the convoy's ground element moving, his voice doing the thing she had not expected it to be capable of, staying steady, staying clear, being the fixed point that the men could orient on. She transitioned to position 4. It was the broadest shooter, the one who had settled in slowly at 0631. He had repositioned during the engagement, which she had also accounted for. She found him. The wind was 12 knots, still steady in this window, the rotation pausing at the top of its cycle the way it always did, the way she had memorized. She fired. Position 4 went still. 4 positions, 4 shots, 4 solutions she had built over 6 days in her head and executed in less than 4 minutes. 1 position remaining. Position 5. The command position, 980 meters. The one that had not moved yet because the person at position 5 was not a shooter in the ordinary sense. The person at position 5 was a coordinator, someone who let the others work and only acted when the situation required a final definitive act. The person at position 5 was the one with the best view of the valley and the best understanding of what was happening in it, which meant the person at position 5 now knew that 4 of 5 positions were silent, which meant the person at position 5 knew something had gone wrong in a way that was not random, was not chaos, was not the acceptable friction of combat, something systematic, something surgical. The person at position 5 would be making a decision right now. She knew what the decision would be, not because she could read minds, but because she had been in this exact position herself as a sniper in an Overwatch role when the mission has gone wrong and the question becomes, do you complete the objective or do you withdraw and survive to complete a different objective later? A disciplined coordinator withdraws. She swept the scope to the north approach of position 5, the withdrawal route, the only clean exit given the terrain, the one she had identified on her terrain walk as the inevitable escape path if position 5 ever needed to move. At 0711, she saw movement, not combat movement, withdrawal movement, fast, low, disciplined, 980 meters, withdrawal pace, moving perpendicular to her firing line, which would create a deflection variable that changed every second. She tracked, she calculated, she held the scope on the moving figure and let the motion information feed into her solution the way water finds its level naturally without forcing. The figure reached the one moment of unavoidable exposure, the gap in the terrain, where the withdrawal path had no cover for approximately 4 seconds. She fired. The figure went down. Not killed, she had adjusted the solution for a non-fatal hit, which required a more precise calculation than a kill shot, because the margin between stopping movement and ending life is much narrower than people who have not done it understand. She had made that calculation in the 11 seconds before the exposure gap appeared, and she had made it accurately. Position 5 was down. Not dead, not escaped. The valley went quiet. The convoy radio crackled, and then she heard Briggs' voice, and it was different from any voice she had heard from him in the entire 6 days she had known him. Not the performer's voice, not the arrogant voice, not even the urgent, controlled voice of a man managing combat. It was the raw, unguarded voice of a man who has just understood something enormous. "What is happening?" he said. "What just happened?" Foster's voice from the base, "Briggs, convoy status." A pause, then Briggs very slowly, as if finding the words for something he didn't have a category for. "The fire has stopped. Sir, all positions are silent." Another pause. "We are no longer taking fire." "Confirm status," Foster said. "Confirming." Briggs's voice paused again. "Sir, I don't understand how there were 5 positions, 5 coordinated positions." "I know," Foster said quietly. "Get your men moving. North exit. Do not stop." On the ridge, Ava Mitchell lowered her rifle. She looked out over the valley, the convoy moving now, the ground element responding to Briggs's direction, the organized movement of people who were still alive and were beginning to understand that they were still alive. She breathed, slow, even. The debrief of her own body the way she always did after a shot, checking the internal record. The sequence, the solutions she had held and executed, looking for anything that had not gone according to the calculation. Everything had gone according to the calculation. She looked at position 5. The figure was down, not moving. She would need to get to that position quickly before the network could reach it, before anyone who needed to disappear could disappear. She keyed her radio. "Mitchell to Foster, position 5 is secured. Non-fatal. I need extraction and a medical team to my coordinates in 20 minutes. Foster's voice. "Copy that, Mitchell. 20 minutes. A pause, then simply, "Good work." She didn't respond to that. She picked up her equipment. She moved to the edge of the ridge and began the descent. Below her, she could still hear Briggs on the radio, his voice continuing that slow, raw process of understanding, the sound of a man recalibrating everything he thought he knew about what one person could do. And underneath that sound, she could hear the convoy moving. Men alive. Men who had been pinned and bleeding and close to a different outcome, moving north now, moving towards safety. Because she had been in exactly the right position at exactly the right moment with exactly the right preparation. She had not celebrated. She did not celebrate. But she allowed herself descending the north ridge of the Karagol Valley on a frozen Afghan morning with her rifle on her back and 5 silent positions behind her, a single thought that she did not file away or quantify or convert into a tactical notation. She allowed herself to think, "Dad, I found it, I ended it." Then she put it away. She had work to do. The descent from the North Ridge took 11 minutes. She counted them the way she counted everything. Not to fill the silence, but because counting was a form of attention, and attention was what kept you alive in the minutes after a mission when the body wanted to release everything it had been holding and the mind needed to stay operational for just a little longer. 11 minutes, her boots found every step without hesitation. Muscle memory. The ridge she had walked twice in the dark 2 nights ago committed to the body so the body could handle it while the mind was somewhere else. Her mind was on position 5. The figure she had put down was alive. She had made that calculation in 11 seconds and executed it accurately, which meant there was a person in the snow on the eastern slope of the Karagol Valley who was wounded conscious and in possession of everything the Quantico contact needed to close the network above the network. That person was the most valuable thing on this entire mountain right now. More valuable than the evidence package. More valuable than the transmission logs. More valuable than anything she had built over the past 6 days, because a person could answer questions that documents could only imply. She needed to get there before anyone else did. At the base of the ridge, she broke into a run. Not a sprint, a controlled, sustainable pace, the kind that eats ground without burning out. She keyed her radio as she moved. Mitchell to Brooks, what's your status? Brooks's voice came back immediately tight and focused. Arrest is complete. Subject is secured. Foster has the evidence package. The subject is talking. A pause. Not yet. Lawyer reflex. Another pause shorter. But the documents we pulled from the office, Ava, it's everything. It's the full routing architecture. Names, codes, dates. It's all there, Odette. She kept running. Good. Stay with Foster. Do not let the evidence package leave his physical possession until the Quantico team arrives. Copy, Brooks said. Then quickly, the convoy, we heard the radio go quiet. Are you 5 positions, she said. 5 silent. Get back to Foster. A longer pause. She could hear him breathing. Jesus, he said quietly. It was not a prayer and not a profanity. It was the sound of a person absorbing something that exceeded the category they had prepared for it. Brooks, she said. Focus. Copy, he said again, and his voice was solid. She reached the eastern slope approach at 0724. 24 minutes since the convoy had entered the valley. The medical team Foster had dispatched was 12 minutes behind her. She had calculated that from the base response time when she'd made the call from the ridge, which meant she had 12 minutes alone with position 5 before the team arrived, and the situation became official documented and no longer in her control. 12 minutes. She moved up the slope. She found the figure at 0728. He was on his side in the snow. One hand pressed to his left thigh, where her round had caught him through and through on the lateral muscle, painful and immobilizing, but not critical. He was approximately 50 years old, heavy build, the kind of face that had arranged itself over a lifetime into an expression of authority, the face of a man who had given orders for so long that his resting state was command. He was looking at her as she approached, and his eyes were doing the specific, calculated thing that people do when they are in a position of physical vulnerability and are trying to reestablish control through another means. She had seen that look before. She did not find it particularly intimidating. She stopped 3 feet from him. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. Neither of them spoke immediately, and in that brief silence, she was aware of all the things she had prepared to feel in this moment. The anger, the grief, the 10 years of carrying her father's death through every deployment, every confirmed kill, every encrypted message and classified file and dead end. And she was aware that she did not in this moment feel most of them. What she felt was simpler and colder and more complete than any of that. She felt finished. You coordinated the operation in the Logar Valley in 2009, she said. Not a question, a statement of record. He looked at her. His jaw was set. He said nothing. Master Sergeant David Mitchell's unit, she said. 7 men, 3 of them made it out. She paused. My father didn't. Something moved in his face, not guilt. She had not expected guilt, but something, recognition maybe, of what this was, of who she was, of the particular decade-long arc that had deposited them both in this position on this slope on this morning. He said, I want a lawyer. You'll have one, she said, in about 11 minutes. She crouched down to his level, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to look at him straight. Before then, I'm going to tell you what you already know, which is that the evidence package pulled from the signals room this morning covers the routing architecture for the entire network. Names, authentication codes, operational timelines going back 4 years. She held his eyes. The network is already being rolled up. Your lawyer isn't going to change that. What your lawyer can negotiate is what you get in exchange for cooperation. He looked at her steadily. He was in pain. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the slight irregularity in his breathing, but he was managing it with the discipline of someone who had been trained to manage it. You're a sergeant, he said. His voice was precise and contemptuous. You don't make those offers. No, she said, I don't. The people in Quantico who've been monitoring your network for 8 months make that offer. I'm just the person sitting in front of you right now. She paused. But I'm also the person who had 5 solutions loaded simultaneously on that ridge this morning, and I chose to put you on the ground instead of in the ground. That was a decision. I'm telling you, it was a decision. He was very still. Something was happening behind his eyes. The particular calculation of a man who has spent his career evaluating variables and who is now evaluating one he had not anticipated. The variable of someone who had a choice and made the harder one and is now sitting in the snow looking at him without anger, without triumph, with nothing except the steady, precise attention of a person who has already decided what matters and is waiting for him to catch up. "The network above mine," he said finally. His voice was lower, different. The command tone still in it, but something else alongside it now, the tone of a man beginning to do math. "You think you've closed it?" "I think we've closed this layer of it," she said carefully. His eyes changed slightly. "There are 3 layers," he said. The slope was very quiet around them. Wind in the distance, the sound of the base's activity carried faintly across the valley. She did not let her face change. She held the information steadily. "Tell me about the other 2, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. In the 11 minutes she had, she did not waste a single second of them. When the medical team arrived at 7:39, they found Ava Mitchell standing 2 feet from the figure in the snow, her radio in her hand, her rifle on her back, and an expression on her face that the medic who later described the scene would spend a long time trying to articulate accurately. He finally said she looked like someone who had just put down something very heavy. Not with relief, with the specific, sober quality of someone who knows the weight is going to come back in a different form and is already preparing for it. She stepped back when the team arrived. She gave them room. She watched them work on the wound with the impersonal attention she gave everything, and then she walked away down the slope because there was nothing more she could do here that the process would not now handle better than she could. She walked back to the base. Foster was in the operations center when she arrived. He was on the radio, his voice moving through the quick, clipped cadence of a man managing multiple simultaneous chains of command. He saw her come in and held up one finger 1 minute. She sat down at the station that had been hers for 6 days and waited. When he hung up the radio, he looked at her across the room for a moment. Just looked. She looked back. She was very tired. She realized the specific heavy tiredness that comes not from physical exertion, but from sustained, high-intensity concentration finally being released. She had been at full operational intensity for 6 days without a complete release, and her body was beginning to communicate the cost of that. "The Quantico team lands in 4 hours, Foster said. "They'll take custody of the subject and the evidence package." He paused. "The subject is talking." "I know," she said. "He started before the medics got there." Foster studied her. "What did he tell you?" 3 layers, she said. "He gave me the structure of the second layer. Partial, enough to verify." She met Foster's eyes. "He wants the deal. He'll give up the full architecture in exchange for the agreement." "That's above my authority to grant," Foster said. "I know. It's above mine, too. I told Quantico 40 minutes ago." She paused. "They said yes." Foster was quiet for a moment. Then he shook his head, not in disbelief she understood, but in the particular gesture of a man recalibrating the scope of what he is looking at. 3 layers, he said quietly. "The Logar Valley in 2009 was the first layer operating on behalf of the second," she said. "My father's unit was not random. They were carrying intelligence that the second layer needed to intercept. The ambush in the Caragol Valley was the same operational model, same purpose, intercept and erase." She paused. He confirmed it. The operations center was very quiet. Foster looked at his hands on the desk. He looked at the map on the wall. He looked back at her. "I'm sorry about your father," he said. It was the same quality of simplicity that Briggs had used the night before the quick, direct delivery of a true thing by someone who was not comfortable with true things but was being honest anyway. "Thank you, sir," she said. He nodded. Then his expression shifted into something more operational, the face of a man who has processed the personal and is moving back to the procedural, which was his natural habitat. "Briggs," he said. "He's back on base. He's asking to speak to you." She had known this was coming. She had been thinking about it on the walk back from the slope. "Send him in," she said. Foster picked up the radio. 15 minutes later, Briggs knocked on the operations center door and came in. He looked different. The same physical presence, the same broad frame and concrete jaw, but the architecture of his expression had changed. The performance was gone. Not because he had turned it off, but because he seemed to have forgotten how to turn it back on. He looked for the first time since she had met him like someone she could have liked under different circumstances. He looked at her. She looked at him. The convoy is secured, he said. All personnel accounted for. 2 wounded, neither critical. Good, she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Foster. Foster looked back with the expression of a man who is giving 2 people room. Briggs looked back at Ava. 5 positions, he said. I was in that valley. I was on the ground when the fire stopped. He paused. I've been in combat for 14 years. I've never seen anything like what happened this morning. She didn't respond to that, not because she didn't have a response, but because she understood that he wasn't asking for one. He was doing what people do after something large, narrating it back, finding the words for it because the words make it real, and real things can be stood next to without falling over. The network coordinator, he said. Is he in custody, she said, talking. Custody, she said. Briggs closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, something in them had shifted. The thing that had looked like fear for 6 days was gone. What had replaced it was harder to name. Relief was too simple. It was the expression of a man who had been carrying a specific weight for a specific number of years and has just set it down, and who is now feeling the absence of it and not yet knowing how to stand without it. 2 years, he said. It was not directed at anyone in particular. 2 years feeding them wrong information, watching people I served with look at me like I was exactly what they thought I was. He paused. It's a strange way to do the right thing. Most right things are, she said. He looked at her, a long look. I was cruel to you, he said. I want you to know that I know that. Whatever my reasons were, cruelty is cruelty. She held his gaze steadily. I know you know, she said. That's why I'm not going to say it doesn't matter. Because it does, and you know it does. She paused. What matters now is what you do with what comes next. He nodded slowly. The debrief. The debrief will be extensive, she said. 2 years of operational intelligence on a network with 3 layers. You're going to be talking to Quantico for a long time. She paused. Tell them everything. Not the version that makes you look best. Everything. I know, he said. Then will you be in those debriefs? Some of them, she said. Not all. He nodded again. He started to turn, then stopped. He said without looking back at her, Snow Princess. It was the first time he had used the name without contempt. He said it the way you say a word when you're retiring it, acknowledging it before you let it go. I'm sorry. She let the apology sit for a moment. Then she said, Go take care of your men, Briggs. He walked out. Foster was quiet for a moment after the door closed. Then he said, The formal debrief on your actions this morning will be required. You understand that 5 simultaneous positions is going to generate significant attention. I understand, she said. The official account will need to be precise, he said. The careful emphasis of a man who is telling her something without fully saying it. The scope of what you did up there from an operational precedent standpoint. I was doing Overwatch, sir, she said simply. Threats presented, I eliminated them. That's what Overwatch does. He looked at her steadily. Then very slowly he smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him. In 6 days, the smile of a man who has spent his career dealing with people who complicate things and who has just encountered someone who simplifies them with perfect accuracy. That's exactly right, he said. That's exactly what the report will say. She nodded. She stood up. She picked up her rifle from the wall where she had leaned it when she came in. She was almost at the door when he spoke. Mitchell. She turned. He was looking at her with the full attention that she had come to recognize as his version of sincerity, not warm exactly, but complete. When the Quantico team finishes and this is closed, formally closed, I'm going to write a recommendation. For the record, for what it's worth. He paused. I've been in this unit for 3 years. I've served with a lot of people. I want you to know that what you did here, the whole of it, not just this morning, is the most complete piece of operational work I have witnessed in my career. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about what to say. She thought about her father in the valley in 2009 and the 10 years in the 5 positions and the name she had pulled out of the routing codes and Briggs in the corridor 6 nights ago. With fear in his eyes and Brooks pale-faced at her door with the transmission log and the 3 words from Quantico. We see it in the 6 words, trust your judgment. Go, and all of it together, the whole of it. The picture she had built piece by piece and held in her head until it was time to use it. She said, "Thank you, sir." Then she said, "Make sure the recommendation goes in Brooks's file too." Foster looked at her, then he nodded. "Done." She walked out. The base was moving around her in its ordinary rhythm. The sounds of post-operation activity, vehicles, voices, the particular frequency of a place that has been through something, anyhow doing the work of coming back to itself. She walked through it without stopping. She went to her bunk. She set her rifle down with the same careful precision she always used every component in its place, because precision did not stop when the mission stopped. Precision was not a mode she switched between. It was the structure of everything. She sat on the edge of the bunk. She was very tired. The tiredness was settling into her bones now, the way cold settles in when you stop moving, gradually completely honest about its depth. She thought about the third layer. She thought about what the network coordinator had given her in those 11 minutes on the slope, the partial structure of the second layer, the shape of what lay above it. It was not over. She had said it to Foster without sentiment, and she had meant it. They had closed this layer, and the closing of one layer was the opening of a door into the next. There was more work. There would always be more work, because the kind of rot she was looking at did not end with a single operation, a single morning on a ridge, 5 silent positions, and 1 figure in the snow. But the Caragol Valley was clean. The medical convoy that had gone in that morning would not be the last convoy to use that route. The positions that had been built over months of careful, patient, compromised preparation were empty and would stay empty. The men who had been on that convoy were alive and would go home. She thought about her father. Not the grief of it, she had carried that for 10 years, and it had become part of her architecture, load-bearing, and no longer separate from the structure it supported. She thought about him specifically as a person, the way he had put his hand on her shoulder for something hard, the way he had called it reading the room before the room reads you, the way he had taught her that patience was not the absence of urgency, but the mastery of it, that you move when the moment is exactly right and not 1 second before, and that knowing when the moment is exactly right is the whole of the skill. She had moved at the right moment, every time, for 6 days, on a ridge above a frozen valley in the Hindu Kush, with 5 positions loaded simultaneously in solutions she had built in her head. She had moved at exactly the right moment. She had learned that from him. She sat on the edge of the bunk in the small room that had been hers for 8 days, and she allowed herself the full, unguarded weight of missing him. Not long, she did not have the habit of long, and this was not the time to develop it, but completely, honestly. With the same precision she brought to everything else, which meant feeling it at its actual depth, rather than its managed depth. Then she stood up. She washed her face. She picked up her notebook, the one she used for operational notations, not the encrypted channels, and she opened it to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote 2 words, second layer. Below that, she began to write what she knew, what she had confirmed, what she had inferred from 11 minutes on a frozen slope, with a man who had in the end decided that what she was offering was better than what he was facing alone. It was not much yet, a partial architecture, a few names partially obscured, a routing signature that matched nothing in the currently active databases, but would, she was certain, match something in the classified archives from 2009 if someone with the right clearance ran the comparison. She wrote for 40 minutes. When the Quantico team landed at FOB Kestrel at 13:40 that afternoon, she was the first person they asked for. Not Foster her. She went to the briefing room and sat across the table from 2 people who had been monitoring a network for 8 months and who looked at her with the particular expression of people who had tracked something on paper for a long time and are now looking at it in person. The senior analyst, a woman named Carver, efficient and direct in the way of someone who has no patience for wasted time, laid a file on the table and said, "The routing code you verified this morning. It matches 2 transmissions from the Logar Valley incident file, 2009. Ava looked at the file. "I know," she said. Carver looked at her steadily. "You know what that means for the scope of this investigation. It connects the 2009 operation to the current network," Ava said. "Same second layer architecture, 12 years apart. Same operational model, same purpose." She paused. "It means what happened to my father's unit was not a one-time operation. It was a methodology. Carver held her gaze. That's correct. A pause. And it means we have a 12-year evidence thread. The statute of limitations on a number of things we could not previously pursue no longer applies if we can demonstrate continuous operation. Ava said nothing. She sat with that. The 12 years. The specific legal weight of continuous operation. The door that the routing code comparison had just opened not into the past, but into a prosecution that the past had previously made impossible. "What do you need from me?" she said. They talked for 3 hours. She gave them everything: the thermal signature, the transmission logs, the routing codes, the 11 minutes on the slope, the partial architecture of the second layer. She gave it clearly in sequence without embellishment or omission. She gave it the way she gave everything precisely. At the end of 3 hours, Carver closed the file and looked at her across the table. "You understand that what you've provided today potentially opens an investigation that could run for years," she said. "Yes," Ava said. "And you understand that your role in that investigation, given your personal connection to the 2009 incident, will need to be carefully defined. There will be people who want to question your objectivity. There will be people who want to question a lot of things about me," Ava said. "There always have been." Carver held her gaze. Then briefly she said something that was not in the operational language of a debrief and that Ava could see cost her a small effort to say because it was personal in a setting that was supposed to be professional. "Your father's file has been in our archive for 10 years, she said. "There are people in that archive who knew the operation was compromised and who were never held accountable for what happened to his unit." She paused. "That is going to change?" Ava looked at her for a long moment. She said, "Good." That evening she ate dinner in the mess hall. She took her tray. She took her food. She sat at the end of the table near the far wall with her back to the corner and a clear line of sight to the door, exactly as she had done on her first evening at FOB Kestrel. The same position, the same precision. But the room was different. Not physically the same long metal tables, the same sickly yellow fluorescence, the same smell of diesel and canned soup. But the frequency of it was different. The men who sat down around her did not turn their shoulders inward. They did not slide their eyes past her or settle them on her with the weight of judgment already rendered. They sat and they ate, and some of them looked at her with the open, slightly uncertain expression of people who are recalibrating something they had already decided and finding that the recalibration is not as uncomfortable as they had expected. Brooks sat down across from her. He set his tray down quietly and looked at her for a moment. "How are you doing?" he said, not the performance of the question. "The real version?" She considered it honestly. "Tired," she said, "and clear." He nodded. He understood both of those things. "The investigation," he said. "Are you part of it going forward?" "As much as I'm needed," she said. "And after that?" She looked at him. He was asking something real, something about what came after, about what a person does when they have finished the thing they have been moving toward for 10 years and the thing is done, but the person is still there. It was a good question. She did not have a complete answer, but she had the beginning of one. "There are 2 more layers," she said. He held her gaze. Then slowly he nodded. Briggs came into the mess hall at 19:15. He got his tray. He looked across the room, not for an audience, not for a position of maximum visibility. He looked for a place to sit. His eyes found Ava's table. He stood for a moment in the middle of the room and she could see him making a decision. The simple human decision of where to put himself, which is never only about geography. Then he walked over and sat 2 seats down from Brooks, and he ate his dinner without performing, without an audience, without the name he had given her, or the campaign he had run, or any of the architecture of the person he had been in this room for 6 days. He was just a man eating dinner. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence between them was not the silence of discomfort or avoidance. It was the silence of people who have been through something together and who know that the something was real and that real things do not require narration to be true. Outside, the Hindu Kush was going dark in the particular way of high-altitude places, fast absolute, the stars arriving with the directness of something that has never had to compete with artificial light. The cold was settling in for the night. Somewhere in the valley below, the 5 positions she had cleared that morning were empty and silent and filling with snow. And Sergeant Ava Mitchell, who had arrived at FOB Kestrel 8 days ago carrying a rifle and a picture she had been building for 10 years, who had been called Snow Princess, and dismissed and mocked and warned and underestimated by nearly everyone in the room where she now sat eating dinner. In peace, picked up her fork, ate her food, and was already thinking about what came next. Not because she was cold, not because she had no feelings about what had happened in the past 8 days, but because the mission was not finished. It was never finished. There were two more layers, and she knew their shape now, and she had the thread in her hand, and she was the person who was going to follow it. She had always been that person. The men who laughed the first night in this room had simply not known it yet. Now they did.